Lava-like flames danced and roared in the crimson river, throwing up huge waves. Lava-like flames danced and roared in the crimson river, throwing up huge waves. Fiery red waves shot to the regional palace and the shores of the river. However, everyone seemed to be entirely oblivious to that. Their eyes were dead set on that starry staff being brought down right above the center of the crimson river. That staff also seemed to be hitting the hearts of the spectators. Futian did what he said what he would do. There was only one among them who would be able to step into the regional palace. Futian beat Xingkai. The winner then killed the loser. That is brutal, Qi Shang said to himself deep down after witnessing that scene. While that battle had indeed been a fight to the death, if Futian were willing to give up killing Xingkai, no one else would have gone up to do it for him. Furthermore, the ninth servant voiced his threat outright. Yet Futian did it all the same, killing Xingkai above the Crimson River. He sent the challenge to ancient imperial city after he agreed to join the regional palace's ranks. I guess that was his thought right from the start? Many murmured to themselves. He only needed to get the regional palace to bear witness to the battle before he joined the regional palace's ranks. And that would have ensured that even if he were to kill Xingkai, the ninth servant would not have been able to do anything to him. Futian made his decision way back then. When he and Xingkai fought in Crimson Dragon City, he already came to believe that he was able to kill Xingkai. The battle at the moment verified that belief of his. A group of people stood at the edge of the regional palace, witnessing that one strike being brought down. Their minds were all rattled, and all of them felt unsettled. Yin Tianjiao's mind reeled from that for a bit. She found herself unable to believe what she just saw. That young man who competed with her back in Emperor Kua's ruins, back then managed to cut down Xingkai, who was known to be invincible among his peers. Xu Zi's expression suggested that she felt only fear and disbelief. She was unable to fathom how it all happened. She did not dare to believe what she just saw. That figure who had been overpowering those of his generation in the regional palace, the legendary man who had beaten her many times, had ended up killed by a proving holiness saint. He grew more powerful than back when he was in Crimson Dragon City. It seems his growth rate is considerable. Pei Min noted to himself deep down. His expression was not all that complex, as he felt it to be a pity. Xingkai was someone who was of equal fame to Pei Min, and he would have been very frustrated getting killed like that. While he did say that he felt that Futian would have won the battle earlier, he did not know how Futian would have managed to win against Xingkai, who was a saint of true self. Yet, in that very battle, Pei Min saw that Futian was able to use the powers he gained from the Peach Banquet as his own, incorporating them into the methods he trained in perfectly. Furthermore, he had also developed a new way of attack, the way of entropy. Xingkai burned his life spirit and blood to bring the heaven-punishing battle form to bear at his last moments, but Futian merged with the stars into a single being, taking the starry battle form. The powers within his body probably would have been on par Xingkai's. The art of the staff used at the last moments saw every single attack feeling as if stars were being brought down. Pei Min was thinking about what would have happened if he was the one fighting Futian instead. He was thinking about if his sword would have been able to withstand such raging attacks with the staff. The might of his sword was such that the attacks only moved forward, with one strike being stronger than the previous strike. However, that was how Futian's art of the staff worked as well, with one strike being stronger than the previous strike. Furthermore, every single follow-up attack contained the might of the attacks before it. The attacks would have continued until they brought down the heavens and the earth, making it so that even Xingkai's battle form was unable to withstand the attacks anymore. Yet another monster was about to join the regional palace's ranks after Yusheng. The regional palace was not to be the place where the most genius and the most monstrous of figures Crimson Dragon had to offer gathered for no good reason. But then again, that was also the reason for anticipation. Under the attentive gaze from all sides at that moment, Xingkai's battle form crumbled. That construct had been conjured by Xingkai's body after all. It was a manifestation of true flesh and blood, instead of the will of the Great Path, which was then given extremely formidable powers. However, that became Xingkai's bane instead. When the starry staff was brought down onto Shinkai's head, it was as if the stars in the skies rained on him. There was no way Shinkai's battle form would have survived that, and it indeed crumbled. When the staff was still swooping in the air, Shinkai's body disappeared in the sky above the Crimson River. On that battlefield above the Crimson River, only that shining body of Yi Futian was left, that starry battle form, which was merged with the great path and basking in the boundless light of the stars. The vast place was surprisingly quiet. Only the roar of the Crimson River could be heard at that moment. It was but an extremely short moment, yet all who witnessed the scene felt as if it had gone on for a very long time. The roaring Crimson River gradually quieted down and no longer rolled about. However, it continued to flow furiously. Its scorching air lingered in their surroundings, but the crowd seemed not to have felt it at all. Their minds still lingered on the fact that Shinkai was dead. A legendary figure whose name shook the realm had just been killed outside of the regional palace by a genius who emerged out of nowhere. Yi Futian made it clear to all of Crimson Dragon Realm about who was the strongest in his generation by stepping on Shinkai's head. He, a saint at proving holiness level, managed to kill Shinkai. It was a feat that would never be able to be surpassed by anyone. The air above the Crimson River rolled at that moment, as if a scorching might was raining down from above, shrouding the entire Crimson River. Yi Futian was able to sense just how overwhelming the pressure of the great path had been. It was as if that might was something that could never be shaken, and it leaned onto his body. However, Yi Futian's expression was calm. He knew who was the one doing it. But then again, they were at the Crimson River, right outside the regional palace, and very much still in Crimson Dragon City. The crowd at the shore was unable to help but part. A figure stood tall right there, and it was none other than the ninth servant. He looked in the Crimson River's direction. His might of the great path shrouded the entire place. His eyes were filled with cold killing intent. He had been watching over Shinkai as the young man grew up. He had already made it to a saint of true self. His young master was not all that far away from the final destination. Yet Yi Futian killed his young master at the Crimson River. He had watched Shinkai grow. Despite being the young man's servant and his protector, he was still Shinkai's elder. That young man had been extraordinarily resilient and arrogant. The blood of Emperor Zhan flowed in his veins. He was forever aspiring to be the strongest, and it was probably due to that he felt vexed at losing to Yi Futian in the peach banquet. He did not leave another mark in Shinkai for that battle. After using the mark of God of War in Shinkai in the last battle, it was incredibly taxing for him to leave another on Shinkai. The toll was so great that it might have even affected him. He would not have been able to use Shinkai's body to do battle otherwise. Furthermore, that battle had been a fight to the death. The regional palace was there to bear witness, and he thought leaving the mark behind would have been pointless. Yi Futian had access to external means for bolstering one's combat prowess as well, after all. The ninth servant thought that Shinkai would have been able to win by using his trump card in that life and death battle. From the looks of things at present, however, if the ninth servant had left behind a mark, he would have at least bought Shinkai some time, making Yi Futian's killing intent falter. Shinkai would not have ended up killed outright like that. Ninth servant. A voice was heard from the regional palace, traveling the vast space. It resounded all over the place. A might that was just as terrifying was sensed as well. At that moment, everyone at the shore was able to sense just how powerful those two pressures were. They turned to look at the regional palace. That aura could only come from that one person. Yi Futian was deemed very brutal for picking the Crimson River to hold the fight, and letting the regional palace bear witness. He had been just as brutal to himself as he was to Shinkai. The loser dies. Furthermore, no one else would have been able to interfere, not even the ninth servant. While Shinkai meant the world to the ninth servant, it was not like the ninth servant had no other concerns holding him back. There was no way he could have cast everything aside and made his move against Yi Futian right there and then. Senior, ancient imperial city accepted the challenge and agreed to fight. With that said, one side would certainly perish. While that indeed was quite a loss, it was Shinkai's own choice. The spectators saw Qi Shang looking at the ninth servant. Qi Shang's tone was polite, Despite being a prince, the ninth servant was nonetheless still a figure at the pinnacle below Ren Huang. He was also considered an elder, so the prince still had to give him face. The ninth servant took a look at Qi Shang. He too knew that he couldn't kill Yi Futian right there and then. Xing Kai was dead, and doing anything would be pointless. He did not say anything more, not even threaten Yi Futian. He turned around slowly, and then flashed, streaking through the air. "Let's go." A voice was heard. Those from ancient imperial city followed one after another and left. Before Xing Kai died, the ninth servant leaned on Yi Futian and threatened him to let Xing Kai go. Since Xing Kai was already dead, doing anything further was pointless. Many watched the ninth servant leave and thought, what would have that city lord from ancient imperial city do? He would not simply do nothing about Xing Kai's death. Yi Futian watched the ninth servant leave. He then frowned hard. The ninth servant was the pinnacle existence beneath the Ren Huang. Yi Futian was wondering just how potent his threat would have been. Despite understanding what would have resulted, he chose to kill Xing Kai nonetheless. Be it killing intent from Xing Kai or the ninth servant, everything became inevitable. As such, he saw fit to get the threats dealt with as soon as possible. A group of people took to the air after the ninth servant left, following him. Those were the people from ancient imperial city that Gai Huang brought with him. Gai Huang's expression was glum as well. He came beside the ninth servant and said nothing. He was responsible for Xing Kai's death too. Back when Xing Qiu participated in the Battle of Qinya City, as well as the time when Xing Kai made a move against Yi Futian, he had been present on both occasions. It could have been said that he gave his silent consent. As such, he felt guilty about what happened. Xing Qiu was quiet as well. He looked rather numb. His elder brother had been killed. Gai Huang, bring Xing Qiu and the others back to ancient imperial city, the ninth servant said. Gai Huang was dumbfounded. He looked at the ninth servant and said with a low voice, "Sir." "Take good care of Xing Qiu," the ninth servant said, and then headed out elsewhere, distancing himself from Gai Huang. "I will, sir," Gai Huang responded lightly. He then looked at the figure who just left. Gai Huang naturally knew where he was heading. Despite being the number one figure outside of Crimson City, he always carried himself as a servant before Xing Kai and Xing Qiu, addressing them as his young masters. If a master were insulted, then the servant would have had to die. It was all the more so now that his master was killed. Gai Huang knew the ninth servant very well. Despite being of extremely great renown in Crimson Dragon Realm, revered by the people, and lauded as the number one city lord, none of that mattered to the ninth servant. He also did not care about how the world looked at him. Face meant nothing to him. What the ninth servant cared about were only the Xing brothers. Xing Kai, who was the one with better potential between the brothers, was killed. One could have only imagined the extent of his wrath. He did not care what the world thought of him. All he wanted to do, at the moment, was to take revenge. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The City Lord's office in Qinya City seemed unusually quiet. The City Lord's office in Qinya City seemed unusually quiet. Some passed by and thought that since it was the day where City Lord Yi Futian was having a showdown with Xing Kai at Crimson River, everyone would have gone to Crimson Dragon City to watch the fight. That fight was of utmost importance. It was simply unknown if Yi Futian would be able to win. Many thought it would be difficult. Some were seen looking up in the sky, thinking that the fighting should have been over given the hour. Some seemed to have sensed a peculiar aura at that moment. A peculiar gale blew all of a sudden, causing all of them to feel a chill. They seemed to have sensed pressure from the gale. That pressure gradually became stronger. Boom. Some grunted all of a sudden, finding the pressure unbearable. They kneeled on the ground right there and then. Their faces became ashen. They all sported frightened expressions as they looked up in the sky. Winds howled above, and there seemed to be extremely potent pressure of the great path descending from above, crushing down everything below. The area was all subjected to that pressure of the great path, with the City Lord's office serving as the center. What is happening? Everyone was shocked deep down. Someone was assaulting the City Lord's office, and that someone was extremely powerful. That pressure seemed like an authority from the heavens. A holiness of nirvana? A figure was seen appearing high in the sky. The robe he wore billowed wildly in the wind. Those deep eyes of his harbored cold killing intent. The ninth servant of ancient imperial city. Many shuddered furiously deep down. It had not been long since the last time the ninth servant came to Chinya City. That was the second time he came. He came personally to Chinya City again. What is the meaning of this? They wondered. It was possible that City Lord Yi Futian of Chinya City won in the fight against Xing Kai at that Battle of Crimson River. Furthermore, the City Lord might have killed Xing Kai. The ninth servant, therefore, was there for revenge. If Xing Kai had beaten Yi Futian, there was no need for the likes of the ninth servant to make such moves personally. His powerful spiritual will swept all over the place. The ninth servant eyed the ground below with cold eyes, finding the number of people in the City Lord's office surprisingly scarce. The few who were left within the City Lord's office all had very powerful auras. It was a testament to how prepared Yi Futian had been, knowing that he would beat Xing Kai, and that the ninth servant would have come to Chinya City. It was no wonder why those who went to the Crimson River with Yi Futian had all been people who were of comparatively low plane levels. But then again, you think I couldn't do anything, just because you left the holiness of nirvanas at Chinya City, waiting for me to show? The ninth servant thought. He was wondering if Yi Futian had intended to take him on as well. He had to admit that the young man who killed Xing Kai in that battle at the Crimson River had been brutal and unyielding. Yi Futian did not give himself a way out. He planned for what would have happened after he won against Xing Kai instead, guarding against the ninth servant's attempt at revenge. Do you think this means anything? The ninth servant thought. Who under the Renhuang can fight me? There might have been several old men in Crimson Dragon City who were capable of doing so, but he deemed no one outside of Crimson Dragon City was able to stop him. Your Majesty, your servant has failed you, for I have not been able to protect the young master. The ninth servant sighed deep down. He lifted his arm and then pressed downward. Extremely raging currents shot downwards within an instant, blasting at the City Lord's office. Waves of terrifying currents pressed down on everything below. A huge palm attack tore through space, and everyone afar saw the City Lord's office being destroyed in a frenzy, exploding and crumbling within an instant. The place was razed with just a single attack. The City Lord's office of Chinya City had seen several destructions and rebuilding. The place was destroyed yet another time that day. The crowd outside of the City Lord's office retreated in a frenzy, getting away from the place. People on a plane like the ninth servant were able to do a lot of damage if they were to fight in earnest. He could have become a living terror if he were to expand the area of attack as he pleased. But then again, no one would have done so in actual combat situations, as they would have hit their opponents with precision. Nonetheless, it was still very terrifying to get caught in the aftershock. Nobody of a lower plane would have been able to withstand such attacks at all. Dust rose amidst the rubble, from which several figures emerged. Every single one of them burst with an overwhelming aura. There were the likes of Wu Yong and the other 3 tribe leaders from the 9 tribes. All of them were holiness of nirvanas. Shen Tianzhan was present as well. All of them waited for the ninth servant to show up. Despite being of holiness of nirvana level, they were different from the ninth servant. The holiness of nirvana, ranked on the regional king rankings, was known as the #1 city lord outside of Crimson Dragon City, and was lauded to be invincible below Renhuang Plain. Even if their several holiness of nirvanas joined forces to take him on, it was not certain that they would have been able to defeat him. It was just like how the likes of Yi Futian, Yu Sheng and Xing Kai could take on any top-notch figures of their plane. The outcome of such a battle could have been determined through sheer numbers alone. As such, the ninth servant knew about those people around at the very moment he showed up, and he did not care at all. There was still a weak-looking figure standing at the raised city lord's office, who had jet-black hair billowing. Formless storms of the sword washed out around her. An area of flat ground was seen with her at the center. At that moment, extremely dazzling light of the sword lit up all of a sudden from that flat land. It seemed that there was a large matrix being activated at that moment. The frail-looking woman, who stood on that sword matrix, was none other than Yaya. However, her aura was extremely sharp. She willed, and within an instant, the vast space around her turned into a world of swords. The light of the sword drowned the place. She glittered and seemed to have turned into a transparent blade. Terrifying beams of the matrix shot to the clouds. At that moment, countless within Qinya City looked in that direction, seeing that beam of light of the sword shooting to the heavens. Many swordsmen far away felt as if their will was no longer under their control. Sword wills gushed in that direction. Some of them wore swords on their backs, which rang intensely at that moment. Some of the swords shot to the air right away. The ninth servant's body became extremely brilliant under the light of the sword. Alert was seen in his eyes as he sensed the might of the swords. He was surprised to find that the ones below had prepped such a powerful sword matrix, just for taking him on. The light of the swords all over the place shot through the space, and shone onto the ninth servant, as if locking onto him. When the beams of the swords were shown onto him, he sensed extremely powerful sword will attacks. However, he simply stood there without doing anything. The matrix was so strong that it could have almost killed holiness of nirvanas at the pinnacle of their training. Even he came to sense threats coming from below. But then again, it was utterly ridiculous to think that a matrix would have been enough to repel him. At that moment, yet another figure dropped to the center of the matrix. That man had a superb bearing and glittered with holy light, and that light melded with the matrix. The matrix lit up more brilliantly within an instant. It circled about, and dazzling symbols appeared, causing the sword matrix to pulse with even stronger aura. It seemed as if the matrix was absorbing the will of great path around them in a frenzy. The ninth servant looked at that figure. The light of the sword matrix continued to climb in intensity. Its boundless light shot up, and that huge sword matrix continued to operate. He found the ability to resemble Yi Futian somewhat. It was able to merge with the great path, resonating with it. It seems like someone from Emperor Li's realm then, he thought. That other figure who appeared was none other than Yin Yuan. He helped Yaya lay out the sword matrix of the void, enabling the matrix to enhance Yaya's power when she was at her peak. Yin Yuan himself was a holiness of nirvana, after all. The one they were about to take on was the ninth servant, and they needed to be able to take him down with a single shot, bringing the greatest attack to bear onto him, giving him no chance to recover. The ninth servant felt the threat continue to escalate. He then frowned. It seemed that he had underestimated his opponents. Qinya City had been well prepared, waiting for him to show. He wondered if Yi Futian's question directed at him back in the fight was meant to incite him. Boom. The ninth servant intended to leave the airspace above the city lord's office. The might of the sword matrix would be cranked to its strongest at such close ranges, and it apparently would have worked against him. However, stars appeared all over the sky around him at that moment. Someone else appeared above, looking as if he had merged with the stars. The man was none other than the star-plucking saint. The ninth servant had naturally detected his presence before, but the ninth servant did not bother, getting ready to wipe him out along with the others. It was due to the star-plucking saint's luck that he had been able to escape last time. Yet, it was apparent that the star-plucking saint had been laying down a trap for the ninth servant before the latter even showed up. Wu Yong and the other three holiness of nirvanas took four corners as well, bursting with overwhelming auras. Boom! Stifling rumble was heard, and the star-plucking saint attacked the figure below him. The huge star-plucking hand of his blasted below, which seemed to have brought the stars down with him as well. The ninth servant lifted his arm and threw a punch at the incoming palm attack. The punch landed, and the palm attack rang furiously. Cracks appeared all over it. The stars all around them rumbled heavily as well. It was as if some formless power across the space had rattled them. Cracks began to form in them as well. The ninth servant shot upwards as he attacked. However, an extremely dazzling beam of light was seen bursting out. Yaya stepped into the matrix right away, turning herself into a sword. The huge sword matrix spun, and countless sword wills melded with that one sword. The sword was still not yet bursting, but it had already fired a beam of the sword capable of tearing the heavens, right at the clouds. It then took flight afterward. An extremely formidable beam of light of the sword appeared between the city lord's office's rubble and the heavens. It was as if the beam had penetrated the sky. The power of the entire matrix was all invested into a single sword, leaving no means of backup behind. The strongest attack was used right from the start. There was absolutely no way they could have afforded to fight a prolonged battle against some enemy like the Ninth Servant. No one could have afforded to do so. The Ninth Servant knew what was coming when the light of the sword burst. His expression turned grim. He slapped his hand downwards. Light of the great path burst, and a holy stone wall appeared, intending to stop that incoming sword attack. Boom! The light of the sword tore through space and shredded the stone wall. Despite the might of the sword being weakened, it was nonetheless able to tear down the mighty wall. The Ninth Servant used the resulting recoil from the attack to go heights. His body was surrounded by countless palm prints of the great path. Those palm prints then shot at the sword coming at him. Yet they were all penetrated and destroyed within an instant. He threw his arm down, and a stifled rumble was heard in the air. It was as if something was about to be shattered with a single punch. The might of the sword paused for a single moment, but continued its way forward at the very next moment, tearing through the sky. Boom! Intense light burst in the sky as the light of the sword engulfed the space around it. Everyone around had their eyes fixed at that scene. That single absolute sword attack burst from the Grand Matrix was a sword matrix of the void, specifically and purposefully laid down to take on the Ninth Servant for a long time. They wondered if that would be enough to kill the Ninth Servant where he stood. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The blinding light gradually dissipated, and someone appeared in the air. The blinding light gradually dissipated, and someone appeared in the air. It was none other than the Ninth Servant. One of his arms was torn off. Sword will penetrated right through his body, staining his clothes in red. His face looked rather ashen, and there seemed to be blood at the corner of his mouth. However, his eyes still looked deep and terrifying, shining with frightening coldness. So this is the present Yi Futian has gotten for me, huh? He thought. That one sword that was meticulously prepped did more than tear his right arm off when it struck him. The terrifying space-tearing powers contained within attempted to tear his entire being apart as well. Furthermore, that formidable sword will had indeed managed to hurt him. However, he suppressed it forcibly by using his overwhelming might of the great path, preventing his body from being shredded apart. His injuries were grave at that moment. He gazed forward, and a young woman clad in white, who looked like an adolescent, stood with blood at the corner of her mouth. Her entire being was clad in dazzling sword will. It was as if she was a manifestation of the sword itself. He never expected to have been so severely injured. Worse still, he suffered such grave injuries not long after he stepped into Qinya City. While Xing Kai's death pained him very much, his young master had indeed fought a hard battle. The Ninth Servant had been protecting Xing Kai for many years. Xing Kai's talents and state of mind held true to his training undoubtedly, yet he lacked a kind of spirit nonetheless. That was because Xing Kai never suffered true despair, and he had never had his life hanging by a thread before. Yi Futian was apparently armed with such a spirit. He did not hesitate, after affirming their statuses as mortal enemies. He sent a challenge to fight to the death to Xing Kai, requesting a showdown at the Crimson River. At the same, Yi Futian laid down one such lethal trap waiting for the Ninth Servant in Qinya City. He knew well what he should have done to eliminate the threats around him, and he went all out to get rid of enemies who managed to threaten him. Compared to Yi Futian, Xing Kai was indeed somewhat inferior in more than just the extent of his talents. Furthermore, other than the holiness of nirvanas from the 9 tribes who were forced to submit to him, he already had several such figures fully willing to protect and fight for him. That also had been something Xing Kai lacked. For instance, that young woman dressed in white right before the Ninth Servant's eyes knew how dangerous it was to fight the Ninth Servant. However, she made her move without hesitation. She had even lashed out a second attack. Sword matrix of the great path circled her, with her, the core, standing at the center. She zipped past the sky, and the orbiting sword matrix pulsed with boundless flashes of the sword. The melding continued until they melded completely into a single sword, which then lashed out at him. Her eyes were cold and determined. There was no hint of hesitation in her eyes. It was as if she locked onto her target, and she was very determined to kill. That attack came very quickly as it streaked through space. All it took was a single thought. However, the ninth servant reacted just as quickly. He stepped out slightly at the very moment of the flash of the sword. Terrifying shocks appeared around him, even though he had only taken a single step. Frightening storms of tremors manifested around him, as if they were able to stop any other forces from getting near. Those beams of the sword that came at him crumbled right away. Only the sword that dazzled brilliantly in the middle continued on its course. The ninth servant lifted his left arm and turned into a mirage. His speed was cranked to an unbelievable extent, making it difficult to track him with the naked eye. Clang! The sword came, and the ninth servant extended his arm and pointed, which landed right at the tip of the blade. That dazzling beam of the sword turned into a terrifying hurricane of the sword and lashed out. The sword matrix intended to penetrate the defenses and hit the body of the ninth servant behind. Yet Yaya only felt that the ninth servant stood there, as if he was the lord of the space around them. The power of that one finger contained the might of the great path all around them. Boom, boom, boom. The sword matrix crumbled and was no more. Yaya's sword was shattered as well. She grunted. It seemed as if her body suffered violent tremors, and she was sent flying back. She used the force of the recoil to leave the battlefield within an instant, flying somewhere far away. She spat up blood as she reeled, looking pale. She knew that even if she were at the pinnacle of her plane all those years ago, she still would not have been able to take the ninth servant head-on. He was someone known to have one leg in the Runhuang Plain, after all. One of his arms was destroyed, and he had suffered grievous injuries, yet he did not so much as frown. He went on to retaliate simply by lifting his left arm. But then again, she was not the only one fighting that battle. The ninth servant sensed horrifying pressure coming from above, as soon as Yaya backed off. He lifted his head, and saw the star-plucking saint throwing a punch from above. It seemed as if stars were falling and tearing through the sky below. The ninth servant felt very formidable offensive powers with that one attack alone. He and the star-plucking saint fought before. If he were at his prime, there was no way the star-plucking saint would have been able to fight him. The latter would have had to run away in shambles. Nonetheless, the star-plucking saint was still incredibly formidable on his own, especially when it came to offensive powers, bringing the power of stars with every single attack. The star-plucking saint took his starry battle form. His entire body dazzled, and his punches felt even more terrifying. It was as if they intended to break the sky apart. The ninth servant stepped out, and his body moved upwards. He charged into the midst of the star-plucking saint's attacks instead of evading. He extended his left arm and grabbed at the sky. A huge palm print appeared above, taking down all the stars around, making the starry sky shudder. Boom! The star-plucking saint's attacks hit their intended target, yet at that very instant, the ninth servant's arm flinched. It was as if countless shadows of the palm were being shot, above one wave after another, reversing the tide of offense. However, those waves of arms were continuously shattered. The star-plucking saint continued moving below, and it seemed he was mere moments from arriving right before the ninth servant. The ninth servant threw his final palm attack. Thousands of palms of the Great Path melded into a single entity. Waves of terrifying might of the Great Path shattered the stars all around them, causing them to explode continuously. However, at the same time, the star-plucking saint's fists arrived. Everything caught in the crossfire between the two men exploded in a frenzy. The ninth servant was thrown down by sheer force alone. Wu Yong and the other 3 tribe leaders of the 9 tribes, as well as Shen Tianzhan, were all holiness of nirvanas. They had long been ready for what was to come, and they definitely did not let the chance slip by. Words were not necessary between them, and they were able to work in tandem with each other seamlessly. Divine Sword of the Vermilion Bird was brought out streaking through the sky, imbued with formidable divine fires of the Vermilion Bird. Wu Yong assumed the Chonglu battle form, and sent palm attacks of the Great Path bursting downwards, burning the sky around them. The tribe leaders of both the Bailey tribe and Nanli tribe attacked alongside Shen Tianzhan. At that instant, terrifying flames of the Wei had practically devoured the sky around them. All of them had been formidable holiness of nirvanas in their own right, and at that moment, all of them attacked the ninth servant. People from far away watched the battlefield. Only saints dared to observe the battle. Even saints found their hearts racing, watching what was going on. Such high-level battles were extremely rare. They would usually never be seen anywhere else. The ninth servant, city lord of ancient imperial city, was being ganged up on by holiness of nirvanas from Chinya city, attempting to make sure that the number one city lord outside of Crimson Dragon City never got to leave Chinya city alive. Terrifying attacks engulfed the sky where the ninth servant was. They only heard grunts afterward, and the ninth servant was nowhere to be found. The hearts of the spectators continued to race. They all wondered if the ninth servant would end up being killed in Chinya city. While Futian had set up that battle meticulously, what was seen then also resulted from the ninth servant growing too confident and underestimating his enemy. He believed in his power too much. But then again, he was indeed formidable. It was just that he never expected to suffer such a massive blow from one sword matrix. As soon as he showed up, the spectators sensed formless powers arriving at that moment. That power rendered their blood boiling, and their hearts beat furiously. A very strong sense of crisis was sensed. It was as if the vast area around them had been shrouded by a formless might of the great path. It's the ninth servant, get out. Those who were watching the battle from afar retreated in a frenzy. Even though they had been very far away from that battlefield, they continued to back away. That power was so intense that if they were got near, they would have been pulverized right away. Look out! The star-plucking saint uttered. A deafening rumble was heard at the next moment. All attacks surrounding the ninth servant crumbled and dissipated. Terrifying storms shrouded the place and the sky shuddered. Waves of terrifying storms lashed out to destroy everything in their path as they hit the holiness of nirvanas from Chinya city hard. All of them felt as if their souls were about to be torn apart. Their blood howled and rolled. The auras inside them shuddered violently. Grunts were heard, and all of them were sent flying. Many who were watching the battle from afar spat up blood as they suffered heavy blows. The ninth servant appeared, and his body seemed to have melded with the heavens. Formless storms pressed down on their surroundings with extreme might. However, the star-plucking saint from above attacked yet again, diving straight for the ninth servant. The latter had already been severely injured, and yet, he still managed to use such powers. That meant that he was feeling terrible himself as well. Yen Yuan and the others continued forward at their target, attacking from afar. The ninth servant, however, was seen stepping out hard in the air. He sent another storm sweeping out. He lifted his left arm and lashed out at the star-plucking saint, forcibly stopping the latter's advance completely. Boom! Another step was taken, and the hearts of many raced. They all stopped dead in their tracks. The ninth servant shot into the air with that step, bursting out of the barricade, then headed far away. It was apparent that he did not intend to fight any longer, intending only to leave the battlefield. Even though he had been able to deal damage to those holiness of nirvanas, it did not mean that he would have had an easy time killing them. If he were to stay and fight any longer, the consequences would be difficult to predict. It was entirely possible that he would die there. Everyone turned around, intending to give chase, but they quickly heard the star-plucking saint saying, "Let him go." Everyone stopped after he said so. The star-plucking saint watched the ninth servant leave. He finally spat up some blood he had been holding in for some time. The crimson liquid dropped to the ground below, yet he continued moving forward, his silhouette gradually turning hazy. The star-plucking saint knew that the ninth servant had suffered severe damage. He would not have escaped otherwise. Even though the ninth servant had suffered grave injuries, if they were to give chase and were determined to kill that man at the pinnacle of holiness of nirvana level, at least half of them would probably end up dead. The strongest attack they had been able to bring to bear was that one sword. None of the follow-up attacks had been able to kill the ninth servant. It made it so that killing him afterward would have been extremely difficult. It was deemed quite a pity, but then again, they gained a lot from that battle. The ninth servant was severely injured, and it would have taken him quite some time to recuperate. Furthermore, the ninth servant understood from that battle that Chinya City did have enough power to shake him, making it so that he would think twice before acting against them again. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Outside of the regional palace at the Crimson River, situated in the Crimson Dragon City, Yi Futian, Xia Qingyuan, and the others were waiting for news instead of being in a hurry to get into the regional palace. Outside of the regional palace at the Crimson River, situated in the Crimson Dragon City, Yi Futian, Xia Qingyuan, and the others were waiting for news instead of being in a hurry to get into the regional palace. While they had indeed set up an elaborate trap to take on the ninth servant in Qinya City, success remained uncertain. He was unable to be at ease until news reached him. He knew that the city lord from ancient imperial city would not be someone easy to take on. However, the tension between both sides had escalated so much that they had to do something. If they were to sit on their hands, the ninth servant would be the one getting to scheme against them instead. Someone eventually appeared in Yi Futian's line of sight. It was Wu Yong. Seeing Wu Yong's expression, the burden on Yi Futian's shoulders was lifted. At the very least, things seemed to have gone well. Wu Yong came to Yi Futian's side and reported what happened in Qinya City in detail, before bringing those from Qinya City back to their base. Yi Futian gave some orders before they departed. He, Yu Sheng, and Xia Qingyuan turned around and went inside the regional palace after Wu Yong and the others were gone. News of the battle in Qinya City spread like wildfire throughout Crimson Dragon Realm. Yi Futian had killed Xing Kai at the Crimson River, and the holiness of Nirvanas at Qinya City managed to rip off one of the ninth servant's arms, dealing severe damage to him and forcing him to retreat. Qinya City had been able to hold its own in the fighting between the two cities. Countless were impressed. The title of number one outside of Crimson Dragon City might very possibly switch hands. Ancient Imperial City became silent after that battle. It was rumored that the ninth servant suffered pervasive injuries and was busy recuperating in Ancient Imperial City. Regardless, that one battle had already proven that Qinya City was indeed powerful. If the ninth servant were to take on Qinya City again, he had to consider Qinya City's retaliation, and if they would attack Ancient Imperial City, that was unless he became able to wipe out the holiness of Nirvanas in Qinya City in one shot. Qinya City sent people to keep a close eye on Ancient Imperial City's movements, or more specifically, the ninth servant's movements at all times. At the same time, the tribe leaders from the 9 tribes stayed behind in the city lord's office to train instead of leaving, just in case the ninth servant decided to come back for them. Furthermore, all of them were fully willing to stay behind. Yi Futian ordered Wu Yong to pass Emperor Qua's lineage to them, after all. After Yaya recovered from her injuries, she and Yin Yuan laid down 2 other sword matrices of the void in Qinya City to defend against incoming threats. However, the ninth servant never went to Qinya City again after the last attack. It seemed as if everything returned to normal after that. Xing Kai, a legendary figure who had once been renowned throughout the realm, gradually faded from the memories of the people of the realm. He was only brought up once in a while, when that battle at the Crimson River was mentioned. At present, the one name that was always brought up by everyone was that of Yi Futian, city lord of Qinya City. However, Yi Futian seemed to have been hardly seen after he went into the regional palace to train. It had been quite a while since he was seen in public. The Crimson River continued to flow as it always had, just like the normal passage of time. 2 years passed by quickly. A great number of legendary figures emerged within the span of those 2 years. The Battle of the Sleeping Dragon, held once a month, continued to be a huge attraction. 2 more battles were held at the Crimson River, and 2 other very formidable geniuses made it into the regional palace's ranks. However, none had been able to achieve what Yi Futian had accomplished 2 years ago, when he emerged like a brilliant star from the sky. Year 10027 of Divine Prefecture Calendar. 2 figures were seen standing on the top of a flaming hill, on an ancient mountain that was scorched red-hot in the regional palace. Both of them burst with extremely formidable auras. One of them held a halberd while the one held a sword. People were everywhere under the flaming peaks. Their eyes were fixed on those two men. A terrifying flash of the sword seemed to be about to flood the entire place. And the swordsman finally made his move. 3,000 swords burst as soon as he attacked. Countless flashes of the sword streaked in the skies, blinding the eyes of the spectators. The other man made his move as well, attacking with the halberd in his hand. A doomsday-like scene emerged on the flaming peaks. The hills around them either burst and crumbled, or were razed altogether. The flashes of the sword climbed in intensity, and it was the same with the halberd, where every single attack felt like a rainbow arching through the sky, tearing through space and destroying the great path. Streaks of dazzling bolts of lightning zipped in the sky. Both men separated after a very loud rumble was heard, returning to their spots before they fought. Pei Min lowered his head, looking at the sword in his hand, of which only the hilt was left, and then flashed a bitter smile at the silver-haired young man. When Yi Futian was still at proving holiness level, Pei Min's sword had still been able to overpower him, without needing to use the strongest attacks. As Yi Futian became a saint of true self, he became able to destroy Pei Min's sword by clashing head only, armed only with his art of the halberd. "You want another round?" Yi Futian asked. "Please don't look for me anymore from here on out." Pei Min then flashed, disappearing from everyone's sight after drawing an arc with his sword. Yi Futian's expression was peculiar as he watched Pei Min leave. He recalled that it was Pei Min who asked to spar with him when he first got into the regional palace. He turned around and looked at the spectators standing all over the place, watching the battle. He then asked, "Would any one of you like to have a go? Let's get out of here." The crowd dispersed shortly. Even Pei Min gave up. "And you're asking us to have a go with you?" They thought, incredulous. "You enjoy torturing us or something. Damn. We can no longer play around like we used to ever since that B***star became a saint of true self," they thought. Everyone in the crowd was determined to behave, as if they heard nothing, if he were to ever ask to spar with any of them. Yi Futian felt rather exasperated after he saw the crowd turning away from him. Being invincible was indeed lonely. He fought almost everyone in the first 2 planes of sainthood, in the regional palace for the past 2 years. Ironically, it had been them who came to him, when he first came to the regional palace. He had defeated Xing Kai in that battle above the Crimson River, after all. However, another figure was heading towards Yi Futian. That someone came before Yi Futian, looking very elegant and exuding a cold grace. It was none other than the daughter of Emperor Wu, Yin Tianjiao. "You want to spar?" Yi Futian asked. "Sure." Yin Tianjiao nodded slightly and asked, "Well, not quite a sparring session. I'm no match for you after all. Take it as me asking for your advice. I've run into some problems with my training." They had gotten rather familiar with each other after Yi Futian joined the regional palace's ranks. Furthermore, Yi Futian was different from how Xing Kai had been. Xing Kai was arrogant and aloof. He acted as if he was head and shoulders above the others, appearing unapproachable. Yi Futian, however, looked carefree and laid back most of the time. He even joked around with others. He was so amicable that even someone as prideful as Pei Min was able to get along with him just fine. Even though the 2 men hardly talked and spent most of their time around each other sparring, Yin Tianjiao knew that Pei Min was very approving and even impressed by Yi Futian. But then again, she knew very what Yi Futian had done in the past, and she had an obvious idea of how brutal and decisive he acted against his enemies. There was no need to mention that his talent was unusually exceptional as well. His comprehension and development in cultivation far eclipsed those of hers. "Very well." Yi Futian nodded, seeing no reason to refuse. "If you have problems with training, why not seek help from elders or cave masters instead? He hasn't been a saint of true self for long, and there will be little he could help you with." A voice was heard saying. Xia Qingyuan hovered to where they were, looking at both Yi Futian and Yin Tianjiao. 2 heads are always better than 1. Furthermore, Yi Futian's talent eclipses mine. It could be easier to discover some latent problems among peers instead. Yin Tianjiao replied plainly, looking at Xia Qingyuan, who had come to their side. "You speak the truth indeed." Xia Qingyuan nodded and continued. "But then again, you probably wouldn't be his match in sparring, and it would do you little good in furthering your training. How about we spar instead? We might find what we each lack from, after all. A hint of bafflement was seen in Yin Tianjiao's eyes. She looked at Xia Qingyuan's eyes. She only found calmness in her eyes. Xia Qingyuan also sounded laid back. It was as if she was only giving a common suggestion. All right then. Yin Tianjiao nodded and flashed, heading towards the battlefield at the side. Xia Qingyuan headed out as well, heading towards Yin Tianjiao. A grand battle that was pleasing to the eye erupted soon, rattling the heavens and the earth within an instant. The attacks from both women were extremely raging. Both traded blows without bothering about defense. Wait, what? Yi Futian thought. Yi Futian, who was at the side, observed the raging battle between the two women. You girls have to go that far? Man, I better not mess with you too, he thought. Yi Futian turned around and left where he stood. He stopped in front of someone else and said, Yu Sheng, let's go. Yu Sheng stepped out and left with Yi Futian. Both of them came to a high ground, and Yi Futian sat on the ground. The year was already year 10027 of the Divine Prefecture calendar. He had been training in peace in the regional palace for the past 2 years, and had succeeded in making into the next plane, becoming a saint of true self. A lot of his powers had grown considerably, but Yi Futian understood that if he were to be ranked among all in Crimson Dragon region, his powers were hardly considered formidable. But then again, he was unable to sit around and continue training anymore. There were still 2 matters that hung in his mind. He wanted to attempt to settle one of them at the moment. Someone else came to their side before long. It was Xia Qingyuan. You girls are done? Yi Futian asked. You girls didn't take your time indeed, he remarked to himself. Xia Qingyuan then shot a cold glance at Yi Futian and asked, You have something to talk to me about? Indeed. Yi Futian nodded and continued. Princess, I'd like to return to Emperor Xia's realm for a bit, and there is something I'd like your help with. Xia Qingyuan looked at Yi Futian. If it were not something important, he would not have come to her more so when he needed her help. She felt rather irked at that thought, and her eyes remained cold. She wanted to ignore him, but she was able to guess what he was up to and knew how important it was for him. All right, Xia Qingyuan agreed to it right away. Aren't you going to ask what it's about, princess? Yi Futian asked. You address me as princess. Would I need to ask any further? Xia Qingyuan's eyes remained cold. Yi Futian smiled embarrassingly. He knew Xia Qingyuan was able to guess what he was up to. He only addressed her as princess when he needed her help, and it was indeed quite shameless of him. He was unable to help but feel somewhat ashamed. However, this was something he needed to see to, and he did not want to wait. She looked at Yi Futian, flashing a bitter smile, and then asked, Are you sure you're going to do this right now? It would be rather risky after all. Indeed. Yi Futian nodded. Waiting would be painful for him, and it would be more so for his brothers and sisters back home. In that case, let's head out immediately. I'll ask for my father's help. Xia Qingyuan did not say anything else. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Ancient Imperial City stood tall and mighty. Ancient Imperial City stood tall and mighty. This place was the king of all cities found outside of Crimson Dragon City. The reason for this was simple. A holiness of Nirvana ranked in the regional king rankings lived within the city. It was none other than the ninth servant. However, the battle that had been fought 2 years prior had threatened Ancient Imperial City's place, meaning that its status was vulnerable to being taken by some other city. Furthermore, the ninth servant had returned from that battle in Qinya City severely injured. He spent most of his time training in isolation, not picking another fight with Qinya City. It was apparent that the ninth servant was unsure of his chances of taking down Qinya City. Those from Ancient Imperial City definitely wanted to probe into Qinya City's movements. He knew that the holiness of Nirvanas had never left the city since then. He also knew that they had put down sword matrices of the void. If he were to attack them again, the sword matrices would be activated once more. He knew that if he were to sustain such a massive attack from the sword matrix again, he would be severely injured. He had no certainty of being able to take those matrices down. At the grand magnificent ancient hall of Ancient Imperial City, Xingqiu stood on top of its steps. He had only emerged from yet another period of training and isolation recently, but the results were not apparent. That battle fought over 2 years ago had affected him greatly, especially when it came to his elder brother's death. He hated himself for being incapable, yet there was little he could do about it. It was the first time ancient imperial city had ever felt helpless. They were unable to take down even that puny Qinya city, yet at that moment, someone emanating a terrifying aura arrived, causing dazzling lights of space to appear in the air. A tall, imposing figure was standing in the air. It was none other than Gai Huang. Terrifying will of the great path of space appeared before him, turning into a screen of light of space, shrouding the space. He shouted, "Sir, there is a sword coming." Yet another terrifying aura was sensed as he spoke. The ninth servant, who was dressed in a gray robe, appeared. He extended his arms, a cold glare in his eyes. It was apparent that he had regrown the arm he'd lost 2 years ago. Nothing looked out of place at all. A screen of swords appeared in the sky. A sword matrix designed to tear the sky down had enveloped the entire place. Countless people in ancient imperial city looked up at the sky. Terrifying storms of the sword whipped up around them all of a sudden. Everyone was thoroughly frightened, and all of them looked terrified. If that sword matrix hit them, there was no doubt it would kill them all instantly. That sword matrix shrouded the sky as millions of sword auras rained down from above. Blinding flashes of the swords pulsed at the center of the sword matrix, tearing through the sky, and heading for the ground. Boom! Gai Huang's defense crumbled right away. The ninth servant took to the air and said to Gai Huang, "Stand down." The offensive powers of the sword matrix of the void were not something that even Gai Huang could stand against. The ninth servant lifted his hand, shrouding the sky as the towering will of the great path engulfed the air around them. An extremely huge palm print appeared in the sky. The ninth servant thrust his hand, causing the palm print in the sky to shake the entire space. The palm print stacked further until it seemed as if thousands of prints were there, rumbling high up in the air. The sky seemed ready to shatter. The swords rained down as the space crumbled like a scene from Doomsday. Countless sword auras rained down and deafening rumbles were heard. The city lord's office of ancient imperial city was being destroyed in a frenzy. Under the bombardment of the boundless sword wills, the place was quickly reduced to rubble. Tall, magnificent ancient halls were razed in the blink of an eye. Boom! A rumble was heard, and the ninth servant was sent reeling back, coming to stand on a broken pillar with a grunt. However, that sword matrix had been more than half destroyed. The might of the sword gradually dissipated. Those in ancient imperial city, who saw the rubble before them from afar, shuddered, their minds reeling from what they had just seen. That's the might of the sword matrix of the void? The city lord was injured by something like in the past? What had happened moments before was incredibly terrifying. The force from that attack could have destroyed a city, yet the ninth servant had stood at the forefront and torn it down with sheer brute force. However, the city lord's office was reduced to rubble. It did not seem that the sword matrix was out to kill them. It had served more as a warning. The ninth servant had arrived at Qinya City 2 years ago and raised the city lord's office. On this day, the sword matrix of the void had torn through the sky, proving its formidable powers and destroying the city lord's office of ancient imperial city at the same time. It had served to remind him that the sword matrix of the void was capable of killing remotely. If anyone were to anger the person wielding such powers, they would be able to destroy their city without being present. Was this considered a threat? Everyone was puzzled as to why those at Qinya City would have sent such a sword matrix all the way to ancient imperial city, as doing so wasted a very well laid down super matrix for killing. Furthermore, the results did not seem to be proportionate to the effort. From a practical perspective, the attack seemed rather pointless. It was obvious that the move had not been worthwhile. Many wondered what Qinya City was up to. The ninth servant lifted his head and gazed in the direction of Qinya City. His eyes remained cold. This was the first time he'd been threatened by someone else. Gai Huang, Xingqiu, and some other people appeared behind the ninth servant, all of them still reeling from what had just happened. That attack, which was capable of being launched remotely, indeed represented a huge threat. If the ninth servant were to attack Qinya City, and they retaliated by throwing one such sword matrix at ancient imperial city, things would turn disastrous very quickly. Someone else flashed in after a while, looking at the scene and shuddering deep down. That person then bowed to the ninth servant and said, "Everyone at Qinya City left their city lord's office not long ago." "All of them?" The ninth servant raised his brow slightly. Indeed, Yi Futian and Xiaqing Yuan also emerged from the regional palace. What happened took place after they returned to the city lord's office of Qinya City. They probably headed back to Emperor Xia's realm, the person elaborated. The ninth servant realized something. So they were sending a warning before they left. Yi Futian was indeed an insolent PR**CK. After what had happened all those years ago, the relationship between Emperor Xia's realm and Emperor Li's realm continued to worsen. Conflicts commonly broke out between those of the two realms. Emperor Li's realm had been very aggressive at the start of the conflict, gathering their troops at the border. After Xiaqing Yuan brought several holiness of nirvanas from Emperor Xia's realm to Crimson Dragon realm for a bit, another 3 mighty figures were brought back to Emperor Xia's realm to serve the realm. The tide turned quickly after that. The top-notch powers of Emperor Xia's realm became stronger than Emperor Li's realm, which had lost the people of the Imperial Advisor's residence. However, the Dali dynasty was a dynastic force, meaning that they were able to command the forces found throughout the realm, something which Emperor Xia's realm was unable to do. As such, despite the turning of the tide, neither realm crashed head-on afterward, only fighting small-scale skirmishes here and there. At that moment, the lieutenant of the army of Tian in Emperor Xia's palace, who was also Xia Rong, the eldest prince of the realm, was about to meet his father. He was dressed in martial regalia and was brimming. He then said to his father, "Father, our holiness of nirvanas are the ones with the edge now. Why not just order the forces found throughout the realm to lead their people to join the battle against Dali right away?" Emperor Xia naturally knew that his eldest son, who'd grown up in the army, was a war hawk. From his perspective, that decisive move he'd pulled back in the Crimson Dragon realm had made him realize his ideals, yet it also made him seem cold and unfeeling. Except for the top-notch forces, the overall strength of Dali remains higher than that of Emperor Xia's realm. If we fight a realm war now, many will perish on the battlefield if we do not have a decisive edge against our enemy, Emperor Xia said. That is the nature of war. The Dali dynasty has always been eyeing us, wanting to hit us. If not for the imperial advisor of Dali not seeing eye to eye with King Tiandao in terms of political ideals, they would have long ago sent their armies surging through our borders. There is no need for you to show that much consideration, father. Xia Rong continued. Wars make people change and evolve. Those from Emperor Xia's realm, who have experienced war, had to grow stronger to survive. If there are massive incidents in the future, we of Emperor Xia's realm will have enough power to deal with them. Emperor Xia knew what Xia Rong was getting at. However, the emperor did not wish to ever see something like that happen again if possible. At that moment, Emperor Xia lifted his head and looked far away. A warm, brimming smile crossed his face, puzzling Xia Rong. Your little sister has returned, Emperor Xia said. Xia Rong turned around and looked far away as well, adding, I'll go out and get Qing Yuan. He then turned around and headed out right away, waiting outside the royal palace. Some time passed and a group of people was seen in the sky, heading toward the royal palace. Emperor Xia had a teleportation matrix that was linked to the Crimson Dragon realm. There was also a space matrix there linking to all realms of the region. However, the toll was prohibitively high, and most people would not be able to use them. When Yi Futian and the rest returned, they dropped many of their own from various top-notch forces off along the way. All of them had been training for years outside. Now it was time for them to check how things were going back home. The others were not idling by while Yi Futian was training in isolation in the regional palace. All of them had been making progress in their training in various places, found in Crimson Dragon realm. Xia Rong stood outside the royal palace and cast his gaze on Yi Futian, whose bearing became even more exceptional. Xia Rong found that he had become a saint of true self. What surprised him more was that few at Yi Futian's side emanated immeasurable auras. They were all more powerful than him. That meant that they were all holiness of nirvanas. They were probably mighty ones of the 9 tribes that Yi Futian had subjugated in Crimson Dragon Realm. They were people like Zhu Kong and the rest. A large group of mighty ones were behind them, which made it look like Yi Futian had brought an army with him. All of them were mighty ones whose training was above that of Saint of True Self. Xia Rong turned his eyes toward Xia Qingyuan. He then flashed a warm smile and called out, "Qingyuan." Xia Qingyuan took a look at him, and her expression turned rather cold. She was unable to forgive him for what he had done in the past. Xia Rong was exasperated after seeing Xia Qingyuan's expression. She was still bitter despite that all of that had happened years before. An elder brother could never compare to her beloved, Yi Futian. Xia Rong turned his eyes toward Yi Futian again. Xia Rong was just about to say something before seeing the other man continue on his way, walking past the prince and heading to the royal palace, leaving Xia Rong where he stood. Yi Futian was expressionless. He did not even bother looking at Xia Rong. Regardless of what Xia Rong's stance had been, regardless if it had been the right thing or the wrong thing to do to the prince, that was Xia Rong's own opinion. Yi Futian was unable to forgive what he'd done back then. Xia Rong's decision back in Crimson Dragon Realm had destroyed the Imperial Advisor's residence, causing his teacher to be reduced to a weakened and imprisoned state. If the Imperial Advisor had not chosen to take on the consequences of what had happened all on his own, there was no way Yi Futian would have been able to stand where he was in the present day. Xia Rong was very clear about what his actions would result in, yet the prince never hesitated. He had been decisive and brutal, which had considerably weakened Dali's powers. But at the same time, that had completely offended Yi Futian. Xia Rong probably would not have minded it back then. In that case, Yi Futian saw no need to pay any attention to Xia Rong either. They were both from the same background in that they all served Emperor Xia. Yi Futian held immense respect and gratitude for Emperor Xia for what the emperor had done for him, but that had nothing to do with Xia Rong. Xia Rong stood frozen. He did not turn around to look at Yi Futian. There was nothing to be seen in those deep eyes of his. It seemed that there was no chance of reconciliation between the two of them. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yi Futian, Xia Qingyuan, and Yao Shi came to meet the emperor within Emperor Xia's palace. Yi Futian, Xia Qingyuan, and Yao Shi came to meet the emperor within Emperor Xia's palace. All the others stayed outside the hall. Yi Futian and Emperor Xia were closer to each other after all, and they needed Emperor Xia's approval if they were to meet him as well. Queen Xiao was there as well. Her eyes looked gentle. It had been years since she last saw her daughter. "Father, mother. Greetings, your majesty and your highness." Yi Futian bowed. "Not bad. You've been achieving significant progress with your training, I see. You've now become a saint of true self. Seems like you've gained quite a lot in your 2 years of training in the regional palace." Emperor Xia smiled and continued, "Qingyuan, you need to work harder." Xia Qingyuan nodded slightly. She, however, had no interest in comparing herself to Yi Futian. Emperor Xia then looked at Yao Shi and said, "That goes for you too, Yao Shi. I'm the outsider here. Please continue without me." Yao Shi smiled plainly before turning and leaving. It was rather unexpected that she just left like that. While Yao Shi had been to Crimson Dragon Realm as well, but Xia Qingyuan looked at her like she was watching over a thief. She was very much on guard against her. She said that she was an outsider, which was quite true. Yi Futian was keeping a distance from her somewhat. From the looks of things, she was able to tell that there were still things that one could not have obtained, simply because one was willing to fight for it. Emperor Xia felt rather exasperated watching her leave, while Yao Shi had joined the royal palace's ranks, but it seemed that she was still unable to truly put some loads she had on her mind down. However, that was all up to her, and the emperor had no intention of interfering. "Qingyuan, how was Crimson Dragon Realm?" The queen smiled and asked. "Very good. There are many exceptionally talented cultivators at Crimson Dragon Realm. Many in the regional palace were like me. coming from other Runhuang realms to train, Xia Qingyuan elaborated. It did her a lot of good training in a better environment. You brought holiness of nirvanas with you on your way home. And you did look like you have had a good time. Emperor Xia then added. So, what are you doing bringing so many cultivators with you this time? I'd like to ask for your help, father, Xia Qingyuan said right away. It is me who needs your help, your majesty. Yi Futian bowed and added. I'm sure you know that I owed a lot to the imperial advisor of Dali. He is in his current predicament all because of me. I remembered the last time I went to Emperor Li's city with you. I told you that the imperial advisor is still someone from Dali. Even if you truly intend to head to Emperor Li's realm, what would you do if Emperor Li intends to kill you? Emperor Xia asked. Emperor Li could not have killed someone from Emperor Xia's realm himself, but killing a traitor of Dali was something no one would have stopped him from doing. If they were to send forces to rescue the imperial advisor, it would have truly made the imperial advisor a traitor after all. The last time we deployed, we did so in the name of staging a war between the two realms, instead of doing so for the sake of the imperial advisor. But the operation this time won't be for taking out cultivators of Emperor Li's realm. It is to take the imperial advisor of Dali out of the picture, Yi Futian said. Emperor Xia's eye twitched, getting what Yi Futian was trying to do so. They wanted to rescue the imperial advisor of Dali, and they needed an excuse. Yi Futian, Xia Qingyuan, and Yao Shi came to meet Emperor Xia in his palace. The others remained outside the hall. Approval was necessary to meet the emperor, though Yi Futian and Emperor Xia were close. Queen Xiao was there as well. Her eyes looked gentle. It had been years since she last saw her daughter. Father, mother, Xia Qingyuan said. Greetings, your majesty and your highness. Yi Futian bowed. Not bad. I see you've achieved significant progress with your training. You've now become a saint of true self. Seems like you've learned quite a lot in your 2 years of training at the regional palace. Emperor Xia smiled and continued. Qingyuan, you need to work harder. Xia Qingyuan nodded slightly, though she had no interest in comparing herself to Yi Futian. Emperor Xia then looked at Yao Shi and said, That goes for you too. I'm the outsider here. Please continue without me. Yao Shi smiled plainly before turning and leaving. It was rather unexpected that she just left like that. While Yao Shi had been to Crimson Dragon Realm as well, Xia Qingyuan looked at her as she would a potential thief. She was very much on guard around her. Yao Shi had said that she was an outsider, which was quite true. Yi Futian had kept something of a distance from her. It seemed she could tell that there were still things that could not be obtained simply because one was willing to fight for it. Emperor Xia felt rather exasperated watching her leave. While Yao Shi had joined the royal palace's ranks, she was still unable to let go of her burdens. However, that was all up to her, and the emperor had no intention of interfering. Qingyuan, how was the Crimson Dragon Realm? The queen asked with a smile. Very good. There are many exceptionally talented cultivators at the Crimson Dragon Realm. Many in the regional palace were like me, coming from other Runhuang realms to train, Xia Qingyuan elaborated. Training in that environment had done her a lot of good. You brought holiness of nirvanas with you on your way home, and you look like enjoyed it, Emperor Xia added. Now, have you brought so many cultivators before us? I'd like to ask for your help, father, Xia Qingyuan said. It is me who needs your help, your majesty. Yi Futian bowed. I'm sure you know that I owed a lot to the imperial advisor of Dali. His current predicament is all because of me. I remembered the last time I went to Emperor Li's city with you. I told you that the imperial advisor is still someone from Dali. Even if you truly intend to head to Emperor Li's realm, what would you do if Emperor Li intends to kill you? Emperor Xia asked. Emperor Li could not have killed someone from Emperor Xia's realm himself, but killing a traitor of Dali was something no one would have stopped him from doing. If they were to send forces to rescue the imperial advisor, it would have truly labeled him a traitor. The last time we deployed, we did so in the name of ending the war between the two realms. But this time, our goal would be liberating the imperial advisor of Dali, Yi Futian said. Emperor Xia's eye twitched as he understood Yi Futian's intention. They wanted to rescue the imperial advisor of Dali, and they needed an excuse. They did not intend to use that as the reason to deploy their troops. The realm would have served as that reason instead. Yi Futian intended to force Emperor Li to hand the imperial advisor over. By doing so, they would have to exercise restraint to avoid infuriating Emperor Li. The realm will deploy an army, yet they will be forbidden from killing any important figures of Dali, as the aim is to save the imperial advisor. I have no doubt it is all within reason from your perspective. You owe a debt to the imperial advisor. But as for the others, I'm afraid they might not be willing to help, Emperor Xia said. We would have an absolute advantage, so long as you give the word, father. We'll be the ones with the overwhelming edge, and the losses would be small, Xia Qingyuan said. Other than the 3 holiness of nirvanas from the 9 tribes that they brought back to the realm, there were also Wu Yong, Shun Tianzhan, and 3 other holiness of nirvanas. There was also Yaya as well. Yin Yuan was unable to fight in the war. The star-plucking saint did not come with them, and Yi Futian was naturally unable to order him to do so. The star-plucking saint had only been out to help him before. His case was different from those of the 9 tribes. Even so, Emperor Xia's realm, which already had an advantage in terms of a pinnacle combat force, had 4 more holiness of nirvanas and Yaya. There were also many unblemished saints from the 9 tribes, which would have enabled them to gain an absolute advantage. It is easy to give the generals direct orders. As for the leaders of the other forces, I shall invite them to the palace. If you want their help, you'll need to ask them yourself, Emperor Xia said. He looked at Yi Futian, who appeared calm after hearing his words. Yi Futian then bowed and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty. Rescuing the imperial advisor was his own matter." Emperor Xia had already mobilized those elite figures many times. They had also been to Crimson Dragon Realm twice. It would not have been a good thing for the emperor to keep ordering them about, just because he was the emperor. Xia Qingyuan did not know what his father was up to, but she nonetheless saw her mother smile while looking at the emperor. Emperor Xia had invited these people to the royal palace before, asking if they were interested in letting their younger members follow Yi Futian to train in Crimson Dragon Realm. Each force did so. The emperor had given Yi Futian a chance to meet up with those people by letting him ask them himself. If Yi Futian had been the emperor's son, he would have been the top choice in the succession of the throne. Yi Futian's talents and renown were such that no one in Emperor Xia's realm did not know of him. He had quite a reputation in all of those elite forces, and many thought highly of him. He had also created his own legend in Crimson Dragon Realm. The queen wondered if Emperor Xia had thoughts about allowing Xia Qingyuan to marry Yi Futian, and then having the young man succeed the emperor as his son-in-law. Everyone in the royal palace knew what her daughter was thinking. She had yet to marry, but there was already a man that she kept following around. In name, she was the princess, and Yi Futian was her subordinate. But from what the queen heard, it had almost always been Yi Futian calling the shots. Queen Xiao then smiled and said, "Go rest. I'll talk with Qingyuan for a bit." "Yes, Your Highness." Yi Futian nodded and left, leaving Xia Qingyuan alone in the hall. Both the emperor and Xia Qingyuan looked at her. The queen then said, "Come over and have a seat." Xia Qingyuan went to her mother's side. The family of 3 acted more relaxed with no one else around. Queen Xiao was not the emperor's first wife. He already had a spouse when he was young, who died in chaos. Emperor Xia was still a saint back then. He fell in love with Queen Xiao after becoming a Renhuang, but it took a long time before they were finally married. In truth, she was only a concubine instead of a true queen. However, his wife did not mind any of that. It was perfectly fine for the emperor to want to remember his late spouse. Despite technically being a concubine, she was hardly different from a queen. "So, how have things been going for the past few years?" Queen Xiao smiled and asked. Xia Qingyuan was dumbfounded. She looked at her mother and realized what she was getting at. She lowered her head immediately and said in a tiny voice, "What do you mean? You two have been going in and out together all the time. Are you still trying to play dumb here?" Emperor Xia smiled. "Qingyuan, why are you still dressed like a guy? This is getting ridiculous." "It's not what you think." Xia Qingyuan turned her head to the side. There was hardly any expression on her face. Emperor Xia smirked at his little girl's embarrassment. Wait, that bastard didn't do anything at all. Sheesh, what the hell? Emperor Xia cursed. Qing Yuan, do you want me to just order you two to marry? I have no idea what you're getting at, Xia Qing Yuan said. Furthermore, Yi Futian is married, and he's busy looking for his wife. While it may be possible that his wife is still alive, the chances are incredibly slim. Well, at least he is indeed loyal. I'm rather relieved to know that. Emperor Xia then smiled and looked at his daughter. Wait, didn't you just say that you didn't know what we were getting at? Seriously, she thought. Xia Qingyuan glared at her father before standing up. I'd like to excuse myself, father. All right, we'll talk about what happened in Crimson Dragon Realm then. Emperor Xia pulled Xia Qingyuan over and gestured for her to sit again. Xia Qingyuan did so in exasperation. You two have been through thick and thin for the past few years in Crimson Dragon Realm. Are you telling me that this kid feels nothing at all? He might be very fixated on Hua Jiyu at the moment, but when he's finally given up on her, that's where you come in, Emperor Xia said. Wait, what? Didn't you say the subject is over? She thought. One could only imagine what outsiders would have thought if they saw this side of Emperor Xia. Despite it being said that saints and renhuangs were no longer mortals, they were nonetheless still human. Emperor Xia was still a father, and fathers treated their daughters differently than their sons. Many legendary figures arrived at the royal palace several days later. All elite cultivators were there. In pretext, the banquet was held to welcome Princess Xia Qingyuan and Yao Shi home. But those of the elite forces more or less knew what the banquet was really about. Their younger members had already brought the subject up. Yi Futian would not have brought so many mighty ones from Qinya City back for anything else. Was he trying to usurp the throne of Emperor Xia's realm instead? Ridiculous. There was only one possibility, Dali. The Swordmaster of Lihan, the Palace Lord of Xinyuan Palace, the Jiutian Temple Lord, and many elite figures were present. They all looked at Yi Futian. Yi Futian was given a privileged seat right below Emperor Xia and beside Xia Qingyuan, which struck everyone present as interesting. Emperor Xia had naturally sat at the very top, the most privileged of seats. He smiled while looking at the crowd and said, I'm sure you've all heard about the incident at Qinya City. Qingyuan and Yi Futian took the city back and established a base for us at Crimson Dragon Realm. Now Qinya City has also become one of the strongest cities to be found in Crimson Dragon Realm. Qingyuan, Yi Futian, and Yu Sheng are all training in the regional palace, a holy land of training in Crimson Dragon Realm. This truly calls for a celebration. The Jiutian Temple Lord lifted his cup with a smile. We thought it would have taken quite some time before Yi Futian became a dear general. We didn't expect this to happen so quickly. Congratulations are indeed warranted, Your Majesty. Congratulations indeed. Emperor Xia nodded. The mighty ones all lifted their cups to toast the emperor. It was an extremely rare chance to be able to drink with His Majesty, and it was all thanks to Yi Futian. As they congratulated the emperor for finding a capable general, in truth they all knew that His Majesty treated said general like his son-in-law. They had all heard of the commotion Yi Futian had been whipping up in Crimson Dragon Realm. They were all very impressed, despite being holiness of nirvanas themselves. Yi Futian was indeed living up to his reputation as one in a million. It was more than just being peerless in Emperor Xia's realm. It seemed that none in Crimson Dragon region could match his achievements. At the very least, there was no peer among the other young ones. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Because Xia Qingyuan and Yi Futian had grown so close, and because Emperor Xia valued Yi Futian so much, everyone present knew one thing for certain. Yi Futian was being groomed for rule. Because Xia Qingyuan and Yi Futian had grown so close, and because Emperor Xia valued Yi Futian so much, everyone present knew one thing for certain. Yi Futian was being groomed for rule. But then again, that was little more than a stray thought. Judging from talents displayed by Yi Futian so far, he would have no problem going to Renhuang Plain. If he were to one day rule Emperor Xia's realm, he might bring the realm to greater heights. The mood of the banquet was great. Everyone was having the time of their life. It was some time after the banquet began that the emperor addressed the crowd. Other than to welcome Qingyuan and Yi Futian home, I've invited all of you here for another matter. This is a matter for Yi Futian to tell you about, so I will excuse myself. Please go on without me. The emperor got up and left. Everyone cupped their hands to send him off. Their eyes turned back to Yi Futian after the emperor left. Other than some important figures of the royal palace, every single person who remained at the banquet was a core member of their respective elite force. Yi Futian looked at all of them and said, "Over the past several years, I've come to each of you for your assistance on many occasions. I shouldn't impose on you seniors any further, but there is something that I can't ignore. As such, I'm afraid I must request your help again, seniors." Everyone had a good sense of what he was leading up to. The sword master of Lihan looked at him and asked, "What do you want us to do?" The Dali dynasty had lost an important figure in the imperial advisor, while Yi Futian had brought back many nirvanas of holiness. Judging from the powers of both sides, Emperor Xia's realm now had the absolute edge. Yi Futian looked at the sword master of Lihan. "I'd like to request that all of you attack Dali dynasty at the same time." "The target?" the sword master of Lihan asked. "I'd like all of you to enter Emperor Li's realm from different directions, then converge in the imperial city. I want Emperor Li to promise me one thing, and I'm sure many of you can guess what that is," Yi Futian continued. The sword master of Lihan did not ask any further. Charging inside Dali dynasty, marching into the imperial city, and then threatening the emperor? The plan was ambitious, but he had to admit that the chance of success was extremely high. If they agreed to help Yi Futian out, the differences in power would become apparent. What would Emperor Li do if he saw enemy troops right outside his palace? He would have to make compromises, whether he wanted to or not. And Yi Futian would achieve his goal to force Emperor Li into releasing the imperial advisor of Dali. So we're threatening the emperor himself then? This plan is indeed bold, thought the sword master of Lihan. Then he nodded and answered with two simple yet powerful words. "Very well." He was at the battle in Crimson Dragon Realm. He was very impressed with the imperial advisor's bearing, so much that he doubted he could have done the same in that position. Such a cultivator, even one on the opposite side, was worthy of respect all the same. Furthermore, this operation posed little risk to him. So long as they refrained from unnecessary killing, things would be relatively safe. "Thank you, Swordmaster." Yi Futian rose. He sipped his drink, then said, "If you require anything of me in the future, Yi Futian swears to see it done." None had helped him more than the sword master of Lihan. If the sword master accepts the proposal without hesitation, I see no reason not to do the same. The Jiutian Temple Lord smiled. "I still remember that time when you and those from Lihan Heaven fought at Jiutian Temple. I surely did not expect to see you sitting side by side today. It's all in the past. Please let it rest, senior," Yi Futian said with a smile. His state of mind was very different compared to back then. The sword master of Lihan had returned Yi Futian's enmity with kindness, lending his sword to one of Yi Futian's people after reaching the 33rd level of heaven. That incident had had quite an effect on his training from then on out. "Count me in. Hasn't Dali dynasty always wanted to attack us anyway? Now we can oblige them this. Too bad we can't kill them though." The palace lord of Xianyuan Palace laughed, showcasing his frank and straightforward temperament. The purpose of the operation was to rescue the imperial advisor, so naturally they would have to restrain themselves and not cross the line. Yi Futian was rather touched, finding so many elite figures who agreed to help him, especially when he'd just spring this on them. He raised his cup with both hands to his lips and drank again. Then he bowed to them. "If any senior present should ever need anything of me, I promise to see it done." With these elite figures by his side, and the powers of Emperor Xia, the operation had now gathered most of the pinnacle forces found in the realm. Couple all that with those he had brought from the Crimson Dragon realm, and it was now possible to overrun the Dali dynasty. It was just as the sword master of Lihan put it. The battle would have been quite an easy one. "I rather look forward to such a grand battle. Now that everything is in order, let's set up a plan and get prepared," said the Jiutian Temple Lord. Everyone nodded in agreement. The banquet ended shortly after, and all the guests went home to begin preparations. When they were alone, Xia Qingyuan looked at Yi Futian. She naturally knew that they hadn't agreed so quickly just because of her father. It was also because of Yi Futian himself. He was an inspirational figure, and everyone saw the potential he had. Emperor Xia's realm became busy after the banquet was over. Due to the scale of commotion in Emperor Xia's realm, there was no way Emperor Li's realm would have been oblivious to it. Both Renhuang realms had placed their spies in each other's territory. Yi Futian's return was not even a secret to begin with. It wasn't long before word of these activities quickly reached Emperor Li's realm. In the imperial city of Emperor Li's realm, a frail old man sat in a prison, held down by a ritual implement. The old man appeared shriveled, his aura was weak, and his hair was unkempt. Footsteps approached, and they stopped before him. Imperial advisor, a familiar voice said. The imperial advisor of Dali slowly lifted his head, and saw the man who stood at the pinnacle of Dali. He exuded a regal, majestic air. He was none other than Emperor Li himself. Your Majesty. The imperial advisor's voice was weak. Though his eyes brimmed at times, the imperial advisor's entire being was otherwise tremendously dejected. News has come from Emperor Xia's realm. Your student is getting ready to amass an army to attack Dali. What do you think of that? Emperor Li asked. Student? The imperial advisor thought. He looked rather puzzled, but he quickly understood who the emperor was talking about. It was not Yin Yuan, nor most others he could think of. The only one it could be was definitely Yi Futian. There is a reason why you are the imperial advisor. You have good eyes. You picked him over Di Hao or Dong Chen, and time has justified that choice. Yi Futian has indeed proven himself far more extraordinary than the other two, so much so that any comparison to them would be laughable. He is now a city lord in Crimson Dragon City, and has inherited the Renhuang ruins. He's being served by several holiness of nirvanas, which have enabled him to turn the tide of the war. Emperor Xia's realm no longer has any disadvantage. And now, he is about to lead an attack into Dali. I'm sure he's doing it for you, don't you think? Ironically, he was the one person you were willing to sacrifice yourself to protect. And now he is now about to attack Dali. It remains to be seen how many people will pay with their lives. What are your thoughts, Imperial Advisor? If it had not been for the Imperial Advisor's treachery, Yi Futian would have perished long ago. The Imperial Advisor lowered his head and said, Your Majesty, when Yi Futian acted out against Prince Li Yao, it was only to avenge his wife as well as the lives of many others. The prince is no longer present, so maybe there is still a chance to turn this around. He coughed lethargically after he finished. To him, being able to survive alone had been a luxury. Emperor Li looked at him silently. Turn things around? How naive, he thought. The emperor turned and left. He had not expected the young man he had met all those years ago could have grown at such a frightening rate. It was so much that even him, a Renhuang, felt somewhat threatened. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The elite forces departed from Emperor Xia's realm several days later. They headed towards the battlefield and prepared to rendezvous with the 8 legions. The elite forces departed from Emperor Xia's realm several days later. They headed towards the battlefield and prepared to rendezvous with the 8 legions. Yi Futian sent 4 holiness of nirvanas out as well. He sent Yaya out with them too, but she was following the ones from the sword clan of Lihan. The swordmaster of Lihan and Yaya had both fought to be the top swordsmen in Emperor Xia's realm. Presently, both renowned swordsmen joined hands as they made for the inner parts of enemy territory. None was able to stand in their way. They could have let Emperor Xia take them to Dali Imperial City right away, just as they had done previously, yet they did not. They went on to wage a war across Emperor Li's realm instead, charging towards the palace. That was the only way they would have been able to truly lean on the emperor. What they were really doing was waging a realm war, not staging a rescue operation. Every single group that departed had several demonic beasts with them, all of which had been enthralled by Yi Futian. By doing so, Each group could communicate with the others. Yi Futian served as the hub, knowing at all times what others were doing. Yi Futian kept only one holiness of nirvana by his side, and that was Wu Yong. The leaders from the Nanli tribe, the Bailey tribe, and the Vermilion Bird clan, as well as Shen Tianzhan, had all departed. Yi Futian remained back at the royal palace, not because he wouldn't participate in the fight, but because he had a mission of his own. Emperor Xia arranged for Yi Futian and his people to have their own palace within the royal palace. No one other than royal relatives had ever enjoyed such a privilege. Even people like the great shaman had only been granted access to training grounds and their quarters, instead of being given their own palace. However, none found that arrangement peculiar. Emperor Xia had long treated Yi Futian as a member of his family. Yi Futian's actual status with the emperor was an open secret. That palace had pavilions, towers, and even a waterfall, making the place look like a paradise. Yi Futian and the fifth prince, Xia Luan, were engaged in a game of chess. Xia Qingyuan was present as well. "I just recalled that I have something to attend to. Please excuse me. Qingyuan, take my place," Xia Luan said to his sister. He rose and patted himself. Without even turning his head around, he began to leave, looking dashing and carefree. "3 losses straight," Xia Qingyuan said in a low voice. "What a formidable player indeed." Xia Luan's mouth twitched, but he still did not turn around. He walked away with his head held high. He was feeling rather frustrated. It was not only that Yi Futian was very talented in cultivation, which made the princes look bad, but many outside the royal palace were talking. They had been saying that Yi Futian looked more like the emperor's son than the princes. Xia Luan was very proficient at the art of chess, and he had actually intended to kill some of Yi Futian's brimming might, saving some face for the princes. The outcome was horrendous. The games only made the prince feel that Yi Futian's ability at calculation was horrifying. "You're up for a game, princess?" Yi Futian asked Xia Qingyuan. Xia Qingyuan shook her head. "I'm not a player." "Allow me instead," interjected Yin Yuan as he approached the pair. "All right, older brother. Let's do this." Yi Futian set the board up. Nan Zhai and Fei Xue were there at the side as well. Both of them started playing, and Yi Futian found that Yin Yuan was also a very skilled player. An intense game emerged between the two masters. Yi Futian learned how to play chess at Chess Saint Villa many years ago, but that did not mean he was invincible. The chess saint was but a common saint. Yin Yuan, on the other hand, had become a holiness of nirvana. He wondered just how capable his older brother was at calculation. Furthermore, Yin Yuan did not let up at all, surrounding Yi Futian on all sides. It seemed to reflect his current state of mind. Yin Yuan must have been worried about the imperial advisor. They wanted to help, but they were unable to. It would have incurred Emperor Li's wrath otherwise, and their teacher was still a prisoner of Emperor Li. No need to get too worried. Emperor Li isn't dumb. He wouldn't have acted against our teacher before things became more apparent. They would have been at an absolute disadvantage otherwise. "They're scared of pissing us off," Yi Futian said. "After all, the invasion was done in the name of waging a realm war." "Right." Yin Yuan nodded. As a holiness of nirvana, his state of mind had long transformed, becoming indomitable. However, the matter at hand still had to do with their teacher, so it was unavoidable that they still felt frustrated. Even though they were practically able to see the outcome, they still worried nonetheless. Yin Yuan was not the only one who felt that way. Nan Zhai, Fei Xue and the others were quiet as well. It was apparent that a load rested on their collective shoulders. But then again, they were all very supportive of Yi Futian's operation. If they were to simply leave their teacher locked up in a cell, no one could tell what would happen to him. Their teacher was no longer what he had once been. His training had been wiped clean, and his life might be in an extremely frail state. It was quite a pity. Despite all of them having trained in the deed of thorough comprehension, none of them were able to immerse themselves as deeply in the method as their teacher. They were unable to see fates and luck in the great path. "You guys are really taking your time." The new voice belonged to the fourth prince, the incredibly dashing Xia Kuan. He approached the game. "Your Highness." Yi Futian rose and bowed, showing his respect. Xia Kuan smiled. Save the formalities. I'm just here to look around. All right. Yi Futian sat and continued to play. Xia Kuan was only there to watch. He then said, "Bravo. I didn't know that Sir Yin Yuan and Yi Futian were so good at chess. I'm sure my brother was having a hard time earlier." "The fifth prince is very skilled as well," Yi Futian replied. "You'd like to think so." Xia Kuan smiled and then followed up with, "Qingyuan, since when have you been interested in chess?" "I'm just watching," Xia Qingyuan said. "Well, we never saw you watch a game before." Xia Kuan chuckled. Xia Qingyuan eyed him with a speechless look. "All right, I'm done bothering you guys. Come to my place if you could spare the time. Brother Yi," Xia Kuan said. Yi Futian smiled and nodded. He received a telepathic message from Fei Xue. His hand hung in midair, the chess piece still in hand. Yi Futian then lifted his head and asked with a smile, "How is the Xiao clan doing now that Xiao Sheng is gone?" Xia Kuan stopped and turned around, freezing in place. He then turned his head to look at Yi Futian. He saw that Yi Futian was talking to his sister. Yi Futian turned to look at Xia Kuan and asked, "What happened, Your Highness?" "Nothing." Xia Kuan shook his head, before turning around and leaving. Xia Qingyuan shot a puzzled look at Yi Futian. That question sounded like it came out of nowhere. Neither she nor Xia Kuan knew how to react. "I've never left the royal palace since I returned, so I have little idea. But after what happened, grandfather felt he should keep a tight leash on the clan," Xia Qingyuan answered. "What's done is done, and Xiao Sheng paid for it. Don't let this get between you and old man Xiao, princess," Yi Futian said and looked at Fei Xue, who was at his side. Fei Xue's expression changed slightly. "I sense a murderous intent," she said to him telepathically. Yi Futian's hand froze again. Then he moved his piece on the board. Fei Xue's abilities were only known to those from the imperial advisor's residence. He hadn't told anyone in Emperor Xiao's realm, not even Xia Qingyuan. If that ability of hers became known, people would have been on guard against her at all times. After Fei Xue's telepathic message, he deliberately asked Xia Qingyuan about the Xiao clan, specifically bringing up Xiao Sheng's name. He was doing that just to see how Xiao Kuan would react. The prince covered himself pretty well, but hints were there nonetheless. Then again, that hardly proved anything, as turning around would have been normal. But that emotion could not be fake, and that was not something he was able to cover. Murderous intent welled up in Xia Kuan's mind as soon as Xiao Sheng's name was brought up. He wondered what exactly that meant. They couldn't find the culprit back then. All the evidence had been destroyed as well. However, as the investigation went on, Yi Futian speculated that the likeliest suspects could have only come from the royal palace. Only someone in the royal palace would have been able to learn everything he was doing, as well as determine that he had headed to Emperor Li's realm back then. However, that was all just speculation. His status didn't allow him to look into those from the royal palace. It was impossible without hard evidence. Xia Qingyuan frowned after Xia Kuan left. She looked at Yi Futian and asked, "What was that about?" She was not dumb, and had naturally known something was amiss. She believed Yi Futian might have been probing. But then again, she was unable to understand why he wanted to probe her fourth brother all of a sudden. Furthermore, he had only probed her Xia Kuan, and no one else. Yi Futian looked up at Xia Qingyuan, feeling rather complicated. This was not the outcome he wanted. The matter had to do with the princes. He was at a loss about what to do. A question lingered on his mind. He and Xia Kuan had not been acquainted before. If there were concerns about the succession of the throne, Yi Futian would serve an important role by Xia Qingyuan's side. But it was not Xia Kuan who would be concerned. "Princess, which prince was Xia Kuan closest to?" Yi Futian asked. Xia Qingyuan's expression kept changing in response to the question. It was apparent that she recalled something extremely bad. So bad that she couldn't bring herself to say it. "Princess," Yi Futian called. Xia Qingyuan turned her head around, looking somewhere else. It was apparent that she had managed to figure something out herself. "Is it him?" Xia Qingyuan turned her eyes back at Yi Futian. Yi Futian looked at her the same way and said, "There is no mistake about it. Even if he isn't the one, he knows something, or may have been directly involved." Why else would Fei Xue detect a murderous intent in Xia Kuan's mind at the mention of Xiao Sheng's name? His current status and power were such that even if he had wanted to kill Yi Futian all those years ago, he would have been able to easily conceal his thoughts. However, the incident with Xiao Sheng had been an unresolved threat, and it had something to do with what happened back then. As such, it became apparent that Xia Kuan was involved. How did you come to that conclusion? Xia Qingyuan asked. Let's just leave it at that. It has to do with some other people, and I don't want to see them involved. Do you believe me, princess? Xia Qingyuan did not say anything else. She actually had an answer deep down. Her instinct was to believe him. The results of the investigations back then strongly suggested someone from the royal palace was involved. It could only have been someone important. Couple all that with the way her brother had reacted to Yi Futian's question, and she realized what was going on. She felt pained at the complications. It was the last thing she wanted to see. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Emperor Xia had 7 children, 5 princes and 2 princesses. Emperor Xia had 7 children, 5 princes and 2 princesses. Xia Qingyuan was the only princess before Yao Shi came to the royal palace, and she had been the youngest. The brothers shared an amicable relationship with their little sister. The brothers doted on Xia Qingyuan, especially the eldest, who doted on her the most when they were young. Xia Qingyuan grew up being showered with love all the time. Even though the princes might have had a somewhat strained relationship with each other, she was never caught in their squabbles. When Yi Futian asked her who Xia Kuan was closest to, she naturally had the answer: Xia Rong, the eldest prince. Back then, Xia Rong was not in the royal palace, but Xia Kuan had been present. Both brothers shared the same ideal. They were warhawks, and incredibly talented in cultivation. What those 2 brothers did put Yi Futian's life in jeopardy. So much so that he almost died. And they were doing it through the hands of Emperor Li's realm. One could only imagine how complicated she felt at that moment. All that time, she'd resented what her eldest brother had done, and how he ignored her concerns. She was unable to forgive him. However, if Yi Futian intended to settle the score with her brother, she wondered what she would do. Those 2 occasions had been brutal for Yi Futian. While the actions were not specifically directed against him, the ones closest to him had suffered the consequences. Long Linger and the imperial advisor of Dali were almost killed. She and her brother still had blood ties despite what happened, but not Yi Futian. After watching him all these years, she knew how he would treat enemies who went out to harm those closest to him. We'll talk about this at a later date, princess. Yi Futian knew that Xia Qingyuan was going through a hard time. He could relate. Everyone had their own stance in terms of sentiment, and the world did not revolve around him. The other princes had little care for him. From their perspectives, it would have been completely normal for them to act against him to achieve their own objectives. But all of that could be tabled for the time being. The most important thing at the moment was the war with Emperor Li's realm and the rescue of the imperial advisor. Everything else had to wait. Mighty ones from Emperor Xia's realm charged from the western region of the Dali dynasty's territory. The armies fanned out as they entered Dali, with each keeping a certain distance away from the rest. A holiness of nirvana led every army, doing so guaranteed that if anything unforeseen were to happen, there would always be a holiness of nirvana present, ensuring flexibility by enabling those people to provide reinforcements across the region at the greatest speed possible. Even though the elite forces had the absolute advantage, they were nonetheless on enemy turf. The Dali dynasty had the home advantage, and the possibility of being ambushed as the armies moved deeper into the territory was very high. As such, they did not charge straight in without planning and fanned out instead, doing everything to ensure that they went at the same pace. The demonic beasts could sense what was happening, which was convenient. Information was constantly being updated and streamlined. That was why such strategies were formulated in the first place. They were sending in massive forces after all, and it would have been ridiculous if they were to do it without proper planning. Every single army had detailed maps of Dali dynasty. They were all given their missions and moved simultaneously. A group of swordsmen rode their swords towards the western region. Their aura was incredibly strong. The ones leading the charge were none other than the sword master of Lihan and Yaya. They brought the mighty ones from the sword clan of Lihan deep into enemy territory. They consisted of an independent army, and were also the smallest among all deployed. But then again, the sword master of Lihan and Yaya were more than enough to take on the massive armies themselves. "We're almost at Daily Mountain," the sword master of Lihan said. All faces became even more serious. They were bursting with sword wills, yet remained cautious. Daily Mountain was the camp where the western army of Dali dynasty was stationed. It had also once been the second largest holy land for cultivation in Dali dynasty. King Tiandao was in charge there. However, he had once spent time at the front lines fighting against the army of Tian, so he had not always been at Daily Mountain. Clouds in the sky turned as the swords zipped past. A group of people went down at blitzing speeds. People below sensed terrifying sword wills coming from above and looked up. All of them shuddered deep down. Yaya waved her hands about and conjured a huge sword matrix in the sky. She gestured and the sword matrix fired at the tall, majestic halls right before them. The might of that sword matrix was not all that powerful. The attack was only meant for probing. From what they were able to sense, Daily Mountain seemed rather empty. Boom, boom, boom. Swords rained on Daily Mountain, and the palaces and halls collapsed one after another. Yet no one emerged. That was supposed to be where the Western army was stationed. It was extensively huge, yet it appeared to be empty. No one is here. The swordmaster of Lihan turned a bolt of dazzling light from his sword on Daily Mountain. The tall, majestic buildings remained, yet the place was truly rendered empty. Not only was everyone gone, but it was also presumed that they took all cultivation resources with them as well. King Tiandao really was something. He ditched his base of operations just like that. Two of the most powerful figures below the emperor appeared at the same time. They were also likely the most powerful of saints in all of Dali. Not only that, the people they brought were far more powerful than those mighty ones behind the sword master of Lihan. It was obvious that they had a good grasp of the makeup of the army when the sword master of Lihan had stopped at Daily Mountain, and they went on to set up an ambush. The enemy army seemed to have laid down a matrix. Thousands of true dragons roared in the sky. "Get into formation," the sword master of Lihan said. His sword aura permeated the sky within an instant and enveloped him. The mighty ones from the sword clan of Lihan drew their swords and prepared to fight. Terrifying storms of the sword art of Lihan appeared all around them within an instant, with the sword master of Lihan in the center. Those swords whipped about furiously, seemingly without order. They formed a huge net of swords at the same time, tearing up the space around them. True dragons roared as they charged. They were immediately cut into countless pieces as soon as they came near the net of swords. Yaya was positioned in her sword matrix, and diagrams of sword matrices appeared around her. She devoured the aura of the sword arts all around her in a frenzy, imbuing those powers within the diagrams. At the same time, the army that was closest to the sword master of Lihan's was led by two holiness of Nirvanas. One of them brought a group and headed out for reinforcement as quickly as possible. Back at Emperor Xia's palace, Xia Qingyuan, Yin Yuan, and the others looked at Yi Futian. "The fighting has begun?" "Yeah." Yi Futian nodded. King Tiandao and the Prince Regent appeared at the same place at the same time, intending to surround the sword master and his people. But they are defending with sword matrices. The enemy stands no chance. "Does that mean the Dali dynasty army is setting up an ambush in the city?" Yin Yuan asked. "Most likely. Looks like it's our time to head out." Yi Futian then looked at Yin Yuan and said, "Elder brother, Feishua, wait for my news." Yin Yuan and Feishua nodded seriously. Yi Futian, Xia Qingyuan, and the others headed out, leading a group of mighty ones for the teleportation matrix. Not long after, terrifying light emanated from the portal. Yi Futian and the others disappeared from the royal palace. The place they were heading to was not within Dali dynasty's territory. They headed out to the realm that the three imperial realms had fought over long ago, the Empty Realm. Empty Realm was home to a passage connecting all three imperial realms. The realm that contained powerful resources was still a chaotic place at present. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.